I wonder sometimes what life would have been like if I had taken a different path, one that didn't involve religion from the start. But then again, I can't dwell on that too much because it would mean I'd be somebody different today. Hello and welcome to the podcast, another episode of Queerly Overthinking. I'm your host, Adam Harper. And in today's episode, we're kicking off the first of a very special series where I reflect on the last 3 decades of my life as I step into my 30s. In this first part, we're diving into my childhood, what I'm calling BC, or Believing Christian. We'll be talking about my early years, growing up in the church, and how faith shaped those formative experiences. This is just the beginning of this incredible 3-part series, so stay tuned for more as we continue on this journey. Well, welcome y'all to this episode where I am taking a full trip down memory lane, reflecting on the last 30 years of my life as I'm stepping into my 30s. This is a deep dive into my childhood, my teenage years, and everything in between, rediscovering the things that shaped me into who I am today. From the moments that I cherished to the things that maybe I wasn't allowed to do or listen to or watch that I'm finally allowing myself to explore and embrace those new things. It kind of feels like I'm reclaiming a part of myself that was always there but never fully allowed to express in a way. One thing that I've been thinking about a lot now, or maybe overthinking, is how I want to be the kind of person that my younger self would be proud of. The kind of person I needed to look out for me back then. This journey has been an eye-opening process as I've realized just how formative my childhood, middle, and high school years truly were. I found myself listening to music from the late 90s, 2000s, and early 2010s as those were the years I was beginning to understand who I was and what I valued, laying the foundation for the identity I would later grow into. While there's always more to explore from those years, I really want to give a nod to that entire span of time because these experiences have shaped the person that I am today in every way. So just to reiterate, for this series, I'm not just going to be reflecting on the last 10 years as I'm exiting my 20s into my 30s, but the full journey, starting with my childhood in this part 1, and continuing through my teens and early 20s in part 2. And I'll be closing out the series with my mid-20s to present day in part 3. I've divided these into 2 sections, BC or Believing Christian, and AD or Agnostic Days, to really mark the evolution of my identity and my beliefs over time. Now, let's jump into year 0, the very beginning of it all. BC, Believing Christian, childhood, 1994. For year 0, the day I was born, or at least the year I was born, I don't have a lot of memories, obviously, because I was just a baby. But I do remember the stories that my parents would tell. And it's kind of silly, but the story of my birth, my parents would tell me about how my mom, she actually got sick. I think she was nauseous. I was probably, the only kid who made her nauseous during her pregnancy and labor. And while she was in labor, my dad hadn't had dinner yet, and so he went across the street to grab a quick burger beforehand. I always thought it was a sweet story when my parents would share it, and I'm a little sad that I don't have a great relationship with them now because I'd love to reflect on it more and write it down in greater detail. But I am grateful to think back on that moment and how it all started. I also feel incredibly lucky to have a few photos from my birth. Even though I was born in a time when digital photography, I think, was still in its infancy, I don't even think it existed yet. So a lot of things were printed on slides or hard copies, so I'm truly thankful to have a few photos from that time. 1995. Okay, so the first full year of being a year old, I obviously probably don't have any memories of that time either. So if I do, they're buried somewhere in my subconscious. But I wanted to take a moment to reflect on how grateful I am for growing up in New Mexico. There are pros and cons to living anywhere, but I've always had a soft spot for New Mexico. I feel so connected to the land there. Anytime that I go back, it feels like my roots. My home now is Texas, and I've always felt a strong connection to the South, and I've really enjoyed being able to live here in Texas. But New Mexico will always feel like it holds my roots, my heart, and or at least the foundations and beginnings of where everything started. And that's kind of what I wanted to think about for this year specifically. 1996. Okay, so 2 years old. When I look at old photos of myself from this time, I can't help but notice the wonder in my eyes. There's this pure childlike excitement about life, and every time I see those pictures, it hits me just how innocent and full of hope I was back then. I often find myself wishing I could go back and tell my, little self, so much is going to happen, so much good, and some really hard things, but you're going to love where you end up at 30. It's hard to truly express how I feel about this time because I don't have many memories from being 2 years old either. But what I do remember is just feeling really happy as a kid. There's something comforting knowing that even though I don't recall the specifics, I know I was surrounded by a lot of joy. 1997, 3 years old. Looking back at photos from this year, one thing that resonates with me is just how much I loved to smile. Whether it was lighting up my own face with excitement by striking a pose for the camera or some other fun activity I was doing, there's always joy in every picture. Even at that age, I feel like I had just this natural connection to happiness, like to just excitement, joy, all the words you want to describe it. It got me thinking, or overthinking, I should say. It's kind of amazing to ponder on how a kid learns to smile or what emotions trigger that joy and laughter. It makes me happy to know that even back then, I was embracing the more positive sides of myself. Looking at it from where I am now at, almost 30, I see that it's been a long road to fully embrace that happiness. But deep down, I've always had this special connection, I feel, to finding that joy and showing it through my smile, through my personality and how I want to present myself. 1998. 4 years old at this point. This was the year that I started becoming really attached, I feel, to my home as a child. And what's wild is that now that my parents no longer live in that house, and even though it's been years since I've lived there, full time regularly, I still find it a little difficult to process. It's strange because while it's not my home anymore, it still holds so much of my past. I remember as a kid, I was obsessed with discovering hidden parts of the house, perfect for hide and seek. In our backyard, it felt massive as a kid, like this huge world of endless possibilities for playing and exploring and pretending. And it's so funny how big everything felt back then. What I find interesting is that I felt more connected to the land than the actual structure of my parents' house. But that realization came later in life, actually, like within the last couple of years. But back then, I was definitely attached to the house. I get so nostalgic when I think about not only the house, but also like the surrounding land. I think about the fruit trees, the flowers, the bushes that we had, the apples, the cherries, apricots, raspberries. It was like our own little garden oasis, which was pretty amazing considering that we were living in a desert. I also loved making mud pies and doing chalk drawings on the sidewalk. It's one of those little things that I hold close to my heart. There was one specific tree which we lovingly called Adam's apple tree. I kind of made it mine, and it was always fun because I was always climbing it, and there was this one limb that I would climb up and sit on and sway in the wind. One particular memory sticks with me when a lot of my siblings were either leaving for their missions or for college. I just felt so alone. I climbed up into that tree and I cried. And I'm even just feeling so emotional right now for that little kid. And just, I don't know, I really cared about my family, and I really was missing a lot of my siblings. You know, I had so many siblings, and just, yeah. I remember my mom, she came out and she coaxed me down with some chocolate milk. But before she did, I remember her telling me that, you know, I said, I miss, you know, my sister, my brother. I miss them, you know, and yeah. It's such a vivid memory for me. And it just, you know, really resonates with me how special that tree and that space, you know, it felt like it was like an extension and a part of me, you know. 1999, age 5. And one thing that stands out when I think about this age was how close I was to family growing up. You know, obviously I just kind of like shared how I was feeling at age 4, bro, you know. As a kid, I wasn't super aware of social dynamics, so I kind of lived in this bubble where I thought everything just seemed perfect. You know, we were one, you know, happy, picture perfect family. Of course, there were days when my siblings and I didn't get along. You know, we definitely stepped on each other's toes living in a big house like that, but that's bound to happen, you know? I feel really grateful for most of this time with my family because I got to enjoy my childhood in such a full way. I look back fondly on a lot of the moments that we shared, especially during the holidays and special events. Things like band recitals, plays, and enjoying all that New Mexico had to offer, such as the balloon fiesta, the amazing food, and all of our just like yearly family traditions. One tradition that comes to mind is we, at least not when I was a kid, earlier my family would celebrate Halloween, but then that changed when shortly before I was born because my family no longer believed in Halloween. And so for Halloween, we would make sure that we would not turn on any lights because we didn't want anybody to think that we were home. And afterwards, we would sneak out of the house and we would go to a hometown buffet, and our parents would treat us to dinner there. And it was just so much fun as a little kid because it was like, oh my gosh, all this food. You could have as much food or dessert as you wanted at the buffet. And then coming back home was always so much fun because we had to sneak around in the dark and make sure we got to our rooms, you know, without causing any ruckus. I do remember one Halloween that didn't quite work for I guess the neighbors or the kids or whoever, because our house did get egged. So these kids are serious about their candy out here on Halloween, let me tell you. But yeah, those are just some of the fun memories that make me smile when I think about it. I also just really loved Christmas. You know, it just, there's something special about Christmas and decorating. You know, I was always big on decorating for Christmas, and I do decorate a little bit in my apartment. I don't have like a big tree, you know, but I always get into a festive fall mood. You know, basically from October to December, I am like in my happy place because there's always something to celebrate. There's Halloween, Thanksgiving, and Christmas, and then New Year's. And obviously my birthday in October. The year 2000, age 6. Oh my gosh, kindergarten, y'all. 2000 marked a turning point for me because from here on out, school really became a pillar in my life. It was where I started to socialize more, and it also became this mental structure for me to more easily reflect back on my life at different points in my life and to like form memories around those time periods. I still think about my kindergarten teacher, Miss Coker. I, you know, enjoyed being able to have somebody that I could learn from. And I always remember like her story times and all the different setups of activities in the classroom. Even at that young age though, I could still, you know, see glimpses of my introverted side coming out, but I always found a way to connect with people. I bounced around a lot during elementary school, actually going to 3 different elementary schools, but this was the first one where I started to have like interactions with people outside of my home who were not Mormon, who were in different backgrounds, different cultures and upbringings. And it was really insightful to kind of just like see that contrast. I think we had our own private bus for kindergartners, which made me feel so special, so VIP. I even remember a lot of the bus drivers being really kind, and it was always so fun to think about how like one day, I'd be able to drive a car and, I always enjoyed riding on the bus. My imagination was huge, thinking about how the bus was a spaceship or a rocket and we could take off at any moment. Those years, those early years of school, really left a positive mark on me. 2001, age 7, first grade. Oh my goodness, y'all. I think my teacher's name at the time was Miss Lauge, Miss Luge. Lauge? No, I think it was Miss Luge. To be honest, it's a bit of a blur, but I do remember everyone having trouble pronouncing her name. So she was okay with us calling her, I guess, something easier to pronounce. I don't entirely recall exactly what. I'll have to go look it up just to be sure, but pretty sure it was Miss Luge. I'm pretty sure. A memory that stands out from this year is there was this huge sandstorm that hit the school and I actually got ants in my pants. Oh my gosh. Because I was like, what is biting my hips? What is biting my leg? And I had to go to the nurse's office to help get them out. And it was such a traumatic experience for little old me. Another time, I remember I got a little too rambunctious during a test and I ended up getting in trouble. I know. It was my first time being publicly called out that I could remember, for something that I just was like, oh my gosh, I didn't realize this was going to get me in trouble. I just remember feeling so shocked because I've always been, I've always tried to be at least a good rule follower. That definitely was a very socially jarring moment for me. This would end up being my last year at that specific school. And though I don't remember a lot about it, I do recall just like the beautiful rainbow colored windows in the hallways. Walking past those always brightened my day. And this was also the year that I believe we made leprechaun traps for St. Patrick's Day. It was a fun little project and I think about it sometimes, always wondering if we ever caught any leprechauns. I had a friend that year who went by his middle name because he preferred it, and I thought that was the coolest thing. Naturally, I decided I should do the same. But when I had people started calling me by my middle name, I'd forget that it was me and I wouldn't respond. So, needless to say, that experiment didn't last long. One more serious memory from this year was when 9/11 happened. I don't remember exactly how I felt at the time. I just knew that something bad had happened. I don't think I went to school that day. The whole world seemed to change overnight, especially when it came to traveling and flying. Before then, I vaguely remember the days you could walk straight through security and meet people at the gate. And it's strange to think that so many people might not even remember a time before, TSA. 2002. Age 8. Second grade, y'all. This was such a fun year for me as a kid. It was the second school I had ever been to. And what's wild is that aside from the gym, the entire school was made up of portable buildings. They had these canopy coverings stretching across the walkways. And I swear, those big beams that supported them were like magnets for people's heads. I know I ran into them more times than I care to admit. I really liked my teachers, Miss Martinez and Miss McElhaney. I do remember that I did get into trouble one time again, and it felt like everyone was watching. It's so funny how we tend to remember those embarrassing moments more vividly than the everyday good ones. But I also remember the fun moments, like dressing up in my Superman PJs for pajama day. I even had a little swirl in my hair for the front just to look like Superman, and I just felt so cool. Bus stops would change every year depending on how many kids were in the neighborhood. And I kind of loved that ritual of, waiting for the bus and walking to and from the bus stops. It was always, I don't know, I fond memories of bus riding for whatever reason. Show and tell was also a big part of second grade. I was always excited to share why something was so important to me, and it made me feel special. And it was also really fun to see what my classmates would bring. This was also the year I got one of my favorite stuffed animals, a little French bulldog I lovingly named Wrinkles. I actually still have him today, which is pretty amazing when I think about how long he's been with me. Every summer we would visit my grandparents, I think every summer at least, and we always made a stop at the local Build-A-Bear workshop to make new stuffed animal friends. Another highlight of those trips was visiting Lagoon, the most amazing amusement park of my childhood. I loved that place, and I keep telling myself, I think I need to make a trip out there again sometime. From a religious perspective, this was the year that I got baptized into the Mormon church. Looking back, it's hard to say if I truly understood what I was signing up for at the time. At 8 years old, sure, I had a sense of right and wrong, but I don't think I fully grasped the significance of it beyond knowing it was what was important to my family. It felt like it was the right thing to do. I wonder sometimes what life would have been like if I had taken a different path, one that didn't involve religion from the start. But then again, I can't dwell on that too much because it would mean I'd be somebody different today. 2003, age 9, third grade. This year feels a bit of a blur. I don't remember a lot, but I do remember my teacher. I believe her name was Miss Boswell. She was nice, but I also feel like she didn't step in much when I had a classmate who was being confrontational towards me. So that was kind of a bummer. That year also stands out because there was a particular trip that my dad and brothers went on to Arizona, and I managed to somehow get my hand stuck into a cactus. Of course, it just so happened to be my dominant hand, which made it nearly impossible to write for the rest of the school year, so I had to do all of my assignments with my left hand, which meant everything was just a bunch of scribbles, barely even legible. I also remember feeling kind of special at school because my dad was on the school board in my small town. And so many of my family members, were pretty connected to the community. A lot of the faculty knew who I was. And in a way, it felt like being a mini celebrity, but more so with the adults than with my peers. I was always like more so connecting with people who were mature and, I wanted to be like a grown up. Another thing that sticks out from these early years is my mom's involvement with the Bithell Farms. I think they're based out of Oregon, and they delivered fresh fruit and fish and other items across the country. My mom was in charge of collecting and delivering these fruit orders, and it became a regular family activity, happening, I think, at least 2, maybe 3 times a year. Rain or shine, we would be out there helping people pack up their orders, basically from the truck to their car. And at the time, it did feel like a chore, but as I look back, I do remember it more fondly. There was something fun about doing it together as a family, bringing people joy in the form of delicious fruits and jams. Speaking of which, those jams are so good. I actually need to order some, even though I don't usually eat a lot of jam these days or like have toast often. I will seriously be considering buying these jams again. 2004, age 10, fourth grade. This was the year my rebellious side started to peek out a little bit. I remember starting a freeze tag club at recess, even though running on the playground was technically against the rules. I was constantly worried after getting caught initially by a teacher that someone was going to drag me off to the principal's office for breaking the rules. But again, I was overthinking and probably had a little bit of anxiety over that. And luckily that never happened. I was still at the school with the portable buildings, and my teacher this year was Mr. Jones. Funny enough, I, on multiple occasions, accidentally called him Mom. And a few times I even called my actual mom Mr. Jones by mistake. That always was a running joke between not only Mr. Jones, but also my mom. This was also the year that I was tested for the gifted learning program. Looking back, I questioned the process a little bit, but at the same time, it felt like a big deal. The idea was to challenge kids who needed more advanced learning, though now I wonder how well that system really worked. Yeah, I'd be curious to do a research study on that. Speaking of Mr. Jones, I really liked him. He quickly became one of my favorite teachers. We had a great connection, and he later became one of my gifted learning teachers in 5th grade. He always seemed to genuinely love teaching and helping kids grow, which really made a lasting impression on me. This was also the year I started flexing my creative muscles for the first time by creating a classroom newspaper. With my teacher's permission, I taped it up on the walls for my classmates to read, and it was just such a fun project. And it felt amazing to see something I created on display for others to enjoy. You know, it's funny how that early creative effort has translated into what I do now, working on designs and creative experiences for people using the Wendy's app around the globe. 2005, age 11. Fifth grade, y'all. This year was truly impactful for me. It was my third elementary school, and it had just been built. Being among the first students to use this brand new campus felt special. The playgrounds were huge, and the library was incredible. Libraries have always been a special place to me growing up. I've always enjoyed them. My primary teacher for this year was Miss Walls, and she, along with other amazing fifth grade teachers, made a huge impact on my life. I even recently reconnected with my old science teacher, Miss Meyer. As I mentioned, Mr. Jones, my previous fourth grade teacher, became my gifted learning instructor, and I remember doing a project on dragonflies with him, learning about their life cycles and just like all different kinds of facts about them, and I even did a painting on one. I've mentioned Miss Walls before on the podcast, but I just want to take a moment again to express how truly grateful I am for everything that she did for me. We had so many moments laughing during tests when we were supposed to be quiet, her silly dance moves while guiding students in after recess, and reading hour, where we would draw pictures of what we remembered from each chapter from a book that she would be reading. And actually, funny enough, I really want to reread some of the stories that she read. There was a series and a few other one-off books that I'm really excited to get back into. Y'all, by the way, side note, I am loving being able to just read a book. Oh my goodness gracious. Again, previous podcast episode, I talk about how excited I am to be able to pick up a book and just like dive into my imagination again. It's amazing. Newsflash. Highly recommend. I also remember how neatly I arranged my desk, probably with a little bit of OCD, but you know, since we had to share desks, I remember just like being very particular about how I arranged it as other students would be using it throughout the day. I remember also loving my art teacher and the creative projects that we got to work on in art class, and our cafeteria was huge. The school assemblies just were always so much fun. And y'all, fifth grade really was a special year for me. It felt like we were the, quote unquote seniors of the school, being the older kids in the building. I also feel like I had a mild crush on a couple of boys, though at the time I didn't even know what, again, being gay was or what any of that meant. It was just, I think, a time of innocence with those folks and, close friendships, but no real understanding of what those feelings were or anything like that. So, yeah. 2006, age 12. Sixth grade. Well, this year, y'all, 2006, it was the year Hannah Montana first aired, and I was immediately hooked. The idea of living a double life, a normal kid by day, a pop star by night, it was amazing. Truthfully, I still listen to a lot of Hannah Montana's albums to this day. This show just resonated with me, especially since I was also into Spider-Man at the time with his masked identity of a normal person by day, hero by night. I'm beginning to see a pattern here. I even wrote stories about being his sidekick and how we would take on the world together. This year, I was introduced to a teacher who still remains a big part of my life, Miss Kayak. She's been through so much with me, and she, along with other teachers, have made just a huge impact on my formative years. It's hard to believe we're approaching 20 years of knowing each other. Goodness, I am just so honored to know her and to be a part of her life and her family's life. I owe and credit so much of my connection to art and culture and diversity to the mindset that she instilled in us as students early on. I want to mention that, she was always taking us to museums, always introducing us to just different types of cultural aspects and art and phenomena. It was just, I appreciate her so much. This was also a new school for me, by the way. So I also have fond memories of this new building for myself. It wasn't a brand new building. Actually, some of my older siblings used to go here, but new to me at least. And especially the library. I really feel like this is where my love for comic books took off. My school librarian, I really connected with her as well. And she would always place orders to stock up on new comic books for the library. This was also when I started to get into audiobooks. I can't remember all the titles that I was reading, but I definitely remember starting Aragon and Eldest from The Inheritance Cycle by Christopher Paolini. We had these MP3 players that only had the audiobook on them, and I listened to them on the bus to and from school. Speaking of the bus, this was the first year I think my schedule shifted. Middle schoolers started earlier than elementary, which meant earlier mornings and a new routine. It's kind of funny looking back on the quote unquote commute as a kid, walking to the bus stop just around the block and a lot of the shenanigans that would go on down there. I usually tried to mind my own business, but the bus stop always had its fair share of chaos, let's just say that. Y'all, I've had such a great time reflecting on my childhood with you in this episode, and I couldn't fit everything in one go. As I was realizing this, as I had recorded everything and was starting to edit, I was like, oh my gosh, there's so much here that I want to share. So I'll be sharing more of this in part 2, where we'll dive into my teenage years and early 20s, continuing that conversation about my experiences growing up with my faith involved and the transitions that I went through during that time. Thanks so much for listening, y'all, and I'll see you next time. Queerly Overthinking is hosted, edited, and executive produced by Adam Harper, with additional producing by Cass Cooper. You can follow Queerly Overthinking on Instagram or TikTok at Queerly Overthinking, and you can find more at www.queerlyoverthinking.com.